Okay, so I've been getting back into FPS shooters recently after taking a well-deserved 2-year break after raging too hard last time and almost breaking my keyboard. But the problem is I also needed a high refresh rate monitor that wasn't going to cost a fortune. This is the BenQ Mobiuz EX2710Q. With a 1 millisecond response time, 27-inch 1440p screen, and refresh rate of 165Hz, on paper it looks like a good choice. And yes, for those of you asking, I can also use this with my MacBook Pro for productivity tasks when I'm not gaming on my PC, but more on that later. Let's start with design and build quality. Overall, it's pretty good. It's not super cheap with squeaky plastic like other budget gaming monitors, but it's also not super premium. But honestly, at this price range, you can't really expect much more. I do like the light silver and grey color scheme and aggressive style of the back though. But the front does feel a little chunky with that front speaker bezel, and I definitely think other monitors come out ahead in this department, like the 1440p EVE Spectrum for example. The stand is also quite gamery looking with an aggressive triangle shape with red accents, and it has a cable management cutout at the back, which was good to see. Does a good job at keeping the monitor stable on the desk, and you get the usual swivel adjustments. But only a tiny percentage of rotation, which is a weird design quirk, probably just in case your desk is really wonky. Speaking of wonky desks, it has VESA support, so you can mount this to a monitor arm. It's also only around 5 kilos heavy without the stand, and I'll link my favorite monitor arms down below if you want to check them out. For ports, the EX2710Q has 2 HDMI 2.0 ports and 1 DisplayPort 1.4. I'm not too bothered that the HDMI port is 2.0 and not 2.1 because you'll likely use DisplayPort most of the time if you want the full 165Hz refresh rate. If you're on a Mac, you can pick up a cheap USB-C to DisplayPort 1.4 cable for about $20 to get that high refresh rate for productivity tasks or even some light gaming in macOS if that's what you do. And if you use a Thunderbolt dock like me, you can easily switch between Mac and PC if necessary. I have a separate video on this that I'll link as well. A pair of rear USB-A ports are available and driven by a single USB-B upstream connection from your desktop or laptop. Now, this type of expansion is starting to get outdated, but again, for the price, it's not bad. The quick menu is quite good. You get immediate access to color mode, game modes, brightness, volume, and also BenQ's version of overdrive and blur reduction, which they've called AMA. The rest of the menu system is okay. There's nothing super intuitive or groundbreaking. I do like the navigation joystick and the dedicated input button on the back though. This is awesome for switching between different computers quickly if you use them. There's two 2-watt speakers forward facing on the chin, and this projects audio right into your face, unlike other monitors that send it into the desk or back against the wall. And there's a 5-watt subwoofer in the back, so you actually get some bass. And in terms of sound quality, these are actually some of the best built-in monitor speakers I've ever heard. And this is a gaming monitor, no less. So I probably wouldn't bother with any kind of external speakers unless you wanted to get a relatively high quality one. And that's instantly gonna save you about $100 to $150 if you just wanna use the inbuilt speakers on the BenQ. Moving on to the panel, it's a 27-inch 1440p IPS panel. And in my opinion, this is the sweet spot for gaming monitors right now. So you get that resolution bump from 1080p to 1440p, which is great for clearer and more detailed game visuals, but it's also not super demanding to run, like for example, a 4K monitor. So if you're playing AAA rated games, you can typically get over 100 FPS, sometimes more if you bump those settings down, with a moderately powerful GPU. For example, an RTX 3070. Plus, you get FreeSync to smooth everything out. Viewing angles are also good, and backlight bleed on my model is minimal. Now, let's talk about brightness and HDR. The peak brightness of this monitor is slightly less than the advertised 250 nits, which means if you're in a bright environment and you can't control the light levels, you're going to have a bad time. For example, if there's a lot of sunlight or overhead lighting. Typically though, I expect most people can either close window blinds or turn off extra lighting when gaming. There's also HDR in the form of Display HDR 400, which, as I've talked about in the past, is an emulated or fake version of true HDR. BenQ calls their version HDR-I, or HDR Intelligent. There's a sensor inside the monitor that adjusts the screen brightness depending on the ambient light and image content. So if HDR is on and also enabled within Windows, it allows peak brightness to reach up to 400 nits, and it pretty much stays there, solving the aforementioned brightness problem. There's also a HDRI profile button on the front, but I found it's effectively just gamma curve adjustments and didn't really do that much. The panel itself supports 10-bit colors, but it's a fake 10-bit in the form of 8-bit plus FRC, although it can only output 10-bit at 120Hz and under. Now, the response time is advertised at 1 millisecond MPRT, but usually you need to look at the G2G or gray to gray response time to get an accurate idea. On this BenQ model, the G2G response time is actually 2 milliseconds. This might put you off at first, but the reality is most 1 millisecond response time monitors can only achieve 1 millisecond by manually going into the settings and setting the response time to extreme or whatever the highest setting is. And this usually causes a lot of pixel overshooting and ghosting. And this is also the same on this BenQ model, although they've called their version AMA. You'll still get some slight inverse ghosting, but it's some of the best I've seen out of other, even more expensive monitors. So it's really no different to the other 1 millisecond response time monitors. Color accuracy is also excellent here. The monitor covers pretty much all of the advertised 95% P3 color gamut and 100% of the sRGB gamut. This means colors during gaming will look vibrant and accurate, and you can also use this monitor for some amateur color correction during photo or video editing. So let's talk about the gaming aspect of this monitor, the most important factor for a gaming-oriented monitor. This monitor isn't an esports pro display, but it's not meant to be either. It's for those wanting to take their gaming to the next level, but still need to stay within a budget. Now, some might say that 165Hz is too little for ultra sweaty games like Valorant or CSGO, but I think it's right in the middle. You get that little bump up from 144Hz if you want to play those hardcore FPS Twitch shooters, but you also get the high resolution for those AAA rated games you'll never be able to run at more than 100 FPS anyway. And this monitor does this pretty well with minimal input lag, screen tearing, or other major issues. Okay, so let's have a talk about pricing, which is probably the biggest negative of this monitor, in my opinion. Earlier this year, the EX2710Q was $400 US, which I think is actually a really good price. But currently it costs anywhere from $450 to $500 US depending on where you look. Now, I think that's a bit too expensive, especially if you consider some of the other more budget-oriented gaming monitors out there that offer very similar features for around $350 to $400. Most people in this price range can't really justify spending more than that, and they'd rather spend that on something like the GPU to actually boost overall performance. Now, don't forget that this monitor does have those really nice inbuilt speakers, so that might possibly factor into your pricing. It might decrease it by about $100. Saves you having to go get some external speakers, but again, most people, including myself, we use headphones already, so I don't really need to ever use the internal speakers on this monitor. So yeah, all in all, I think it's a pretty solid monitor. It doesn't really do anything exceptionally, but then again, it doesn't really have any major flaws apart from the current pricing. So if you're looking to upgrade from maybe a 1080p monitor and you want something that has good color accuracy and also a relatively high refresh rate, this is definitely one to consider. But apart from that, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I will catch you in the next one.